3 minutes before the ceremony, I found a leather diary under the limousine seat stamped with my son-in-law's initials. The final entry read simply, "Today is the day. The old man won't—" I never got to finish reading. Security blocked me at the chapel doors, calling me a moocher in front of 200 guests. My daughter did not defend me. She just watched with cold eyes, waiting for the humiliation to begin. My name is Marjorie Klein, though most people in the quiet town of Lakeshore Falls simply call me Marge. At 61 years old, I have learned that silence is often the loudest sound in a room. I spent nearly 40 years working in the basement of the Greywick Municipal Archives, organizing the history of other people while my own life became smaller and quieter. I was used to dust and paper cuts, not the gleam of high society. The morning of my granddaughter Willa's wedding started with a needle and thread. My fingers were stiff. The arthritis always flared up when the weather turned grey, but I refused to let a loose hem ruin the navy blue dress I had found on the clearance rack for $30. I sat by the window in my small kitchen, squinting at the fabric, stitching it closed with the precision of a woman who had spent a lifetime making do with less. I wanted to look respectable, not rich, because I was not rich, but dignified. My phone buzzed against the Formica table. It was my daughter, Dana. I expected a happy greeting, perhaps a shared moment of excitement before she gave her daughter away. Instead, her voice was brittle. "Mom, please listen to me," Dana said, her breath hitching slightly. "Do not embarrass us today. Do not talk about your financial situation to anyone. And do not mention Dad. Just smile and nod. Please, Dana, I only want to see Willa be happy," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite the sting in my chest. "I know. Mom, I know. But Blake, he is under a lot of pressure. Just stay in the background." "Okay." She hung up before I could say I loved her. The fear in her voice lingered in the kitchen long after the call ended. It was not the voice of a proud mother of the bride. It was the voice of a woman walking on a wire. The transportation to the venue was a sleek black limousine that Blake had insisted upon sending. He liked gestures that looked generous but felt controlling. When the car pulled up to the curb at the Crestmont Conservatory, I hesitated before opening the door. Through the tinted glass, I saw Dana and her husband, Blake Holden, standing near the entrance of the massive glass structure. Blake was gripping Dana's elbow hard. He was whispering something into her ear, his face contorted in a snarl that I had never seen before. Dana looked down at her shoes, shrinking into herself. Then I opened the door. As soon as my foot touched the pavement, they snapped apart. Blake turned his head, and a blinding, perfect smile plastered itself onto his face. It was like watching a shark decide to look friendly. "Marge, glad you made it," Blake called out, though his eyes remained flat. I nodded and turned back to the car to grab my purse. That was when I saw it. Tucked halfway under the leather seat where Blake had likely been sitting earlier was a small, bound notebook. It was expensive leather, black and sleek. I picked it up. The smell hit me instantly. Sandalwood and expensive musk. It was the exact scent of Blake's cologne. The initials B.H. were embossed in gold on the corner. I do not know why I opened it. Perhaps it was the fear in Dana's voice earlier. Perhaps it was the way he had gripped her arm. I flipped through the pages. It was not a diary. It was a ledger of calculated moves. The handwriting was sharp and jagged, I saw lists that made no sense for a wedding: contract contingencies, power of attorney transfer, security blind spots, camera placement. These were not the notes of a groom's father or a loving husband. They were the notes of a general planning an ambush. I turned to the very last page. The bottom half had been ripped out aggressively, leaving a jagged edge. The final sentence, scrawled in heavy ink, stopped abruptly. Today is the day. The old man won't. The sentence hung there. The old man won't. What won't sign, won't live, won't agree. A shiver that had nothing to do with the air conditioning ran through my shoulders. The words felt violent. I looked up at the conservatory, at the guests filing in, wearing silk and diamonds. I suddenly felt very small in my mended dress. "Mom, are you coming?" Dana called out. Her voice was higher than usual. I am coming," I said to myself, my voice barely a whisper. I slipped the notebook into my handbag, tucking it deep behind my wallet and a packet of tissues. I told myself I was overreacting. I told myself I was just a tired old woman from Lakeshore Falls who read too many mystery novels. "I am just here for Willa," I repeated in my head. Just for Willa. I stepped away from the car. As I walked toward the grand glass doors of the venue, my eyes scanned the perimeter. Most of the guests were clustered near the champagne tower inside, but outside, standing near the decorative iron gates, was a man I did not recognize. He had silver hair and wore a suit that looked tailored but worn. He was not smiling. He was not looking at the bride. He was not looking at the groom. He was staring directly at the entrance, checking his watch, and then looking back at the doors. He looked like a man counting seconds. He looked like a man who knew exactly what was about to happen. The air inside the Crestmont Conservatory was cold, smelling of expensive lilies and chilled ambition. I approached the welcome desk, where a young woman with a tight bun and a clipboard stood guard. She scanned my clearance rack dress and my sensible shoes, her eyes lingering on the hand-stitched hem I had finished only 2 hours ago. "Excuse me." "Ma'am," she said, her voice dripping with polite condescension. "The service entrance is around the back near the catering vans. Guests enter through the main foyer." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, a familiar burn of shame I thought I had left behind years ago. I straightened my back, clutching my purse tighter. "I am not staff," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. "I am Marjorie Klein. The bride is my granddaughter." The woman blinked, checked her list, and then gave a tight, dismissive nod. "Oh, right. You are at table 29. It is in the back." I walked down the long aisle of the reception hall. The room was arranged like a hierarchy of importance. The front rows, bathed in the best lighting and closest to the head table, were filled with the Holden family and their associates. I saw Blake's parents, Vernon and Elise Holden, sitting like royalty. I kept walking, past the crystal centerpieces, past the champagne towers. I was directed to the very last table, tucked into a dark corner near the swinging kitchen doors. There were 8 chairs. But when I looked for my place setting, there was no card with my name. Just a blank white napkin. Dana floated past me a moment later, her silk dress rustling softly. She looked beautiful but fragile, like a glass ornament about to shatter. She leaned in close, smelling of wine and fear. "Mom, please, don't cause a scene," she whispered, her eyes darting around to see if anyone was watching us. "Just sit here and be quiet. Dana, there is no name card for me," I said softly. It doesn't matter, she hissed, pulling away as if I were contagious. Just stay invisible. She hurried away without looking back. I sat down alone. As the ceremony transitioned into the reception, I observed the guests. These were not family friends. They were men in sharp suits discussing mergers and women assessing each other's jewelry. It felt less like a wedding and more like a board meeting where attendance was mandatory. By the time the speeches ended, my stomach was growling. I had been too nervous to eat breakfast. I waited until the line at the buffet dwindled, then quietly made my way toward the carving station. I picked up a small plate. Suddenly, a hand slammed onto the table next to me. The silverware rattled. The room, which had been buzzing with low conversation, went silent. I looked up. It was Blake. He was holding a glass of scotch, his face flushed, his eyes bright with malice. Put the plate down. Marge, Blake announced, his voice booming across the silent hall. I beg your pardon, I asked, my hand trembling slightly. I said, put it down. Blake shouted, stepping closer so everyone could see him tower over me. You don't belong to this family. You never have. You just came here to eat for free. Didn't you? Just another handout for poor old Marge. I froze. The cruelty was so sudden, so public, that my mind could not process it. Somewhere to my left, I heard a stifled giggle, then another. Blake turned to the catering staff, snapping his fingers. Do not serve her. She is not a guest. She is a charity case. The laughter spread like a virus. It was not raucous, but low and mocking. I saw a young man in a grey suit hold up his phone. The camera lens pointed directly at my face. I looked for Dana. She was standing near the head table, gripping the stem of her wine glass so hard her knuckles were white. Her face was drained of blood. She looked at me, then looked at the floor. She did not move. She did not speak. She stood there, paralyzed, like a rabbit sensing a predator but unable to run. Go sit down. Marge. Blake sneered, leaning in close enough for only me to hear the next part. Or better yet, leave. I stared at him. The anger in his eyes felt rehearsed. The volume of his voice was projected for the back row. This did not feel like a drunken outburst. It felt like a scene from a play. He was performing. He wanted a reaction. He wanted me to scream, or cry, or cause the scene Dana had begged me to avoid. I slowly set the empty plate back on the table. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but a strange clarity washed over me. I took a step back, away from the food, away from the laughter. My hand brushed against my handbag, feeling the hard rectangular shape of the leather notebook inside. The old man won't. The answer to this madness was not in this room. It was in my bag. Blake was not just being cruel. He was executing a plan, and I was the prop. I lowered my head, not in defeat, but to hide the realization in my eyes. I turned and walked back to my dark corner, the sound of snickering following me like a shadow. I pushed through the heavy door of the ladies' restroom and locked the latch behind me. The silence was sudden and absolute. My hands were trembling so violently that it took me 2 tries to flip the lock on the handicap stall. I sat down on the closed lid of the toilet, my breath coming in short. Sharp gasps. I was not crying. I was too terrified to cry. I pulled the leather notebook from my purse. My fingers fumbled with the pages until I found the middle section. The ink was black, the strokes precise. It was not a diary of thoughts. It was a script. There, in the center of the page, was a checklist seat placement, food incident, recording, witnesses. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. The isolation at the back table, the missing name card, the public humiliation at the buffet. It had all been choreographed. Blake had not lost his temper. He had hit his marks. I turned the page, and my stomach dropped. Get Marge to sign under stress. A thick, black arrow pointed from that sentence to a circled acronym, POO, Power of Attorney. The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. 3 months ago, Dana had come to my small house in Lakeshore Falls. She had been jittery, talking too fast about updating municipal records and tax codes. She had slapped a stack of papers on my kitchen table. "Mom, please, just sign here and here," she had said, tapping the lines with a pen. "It is just technical stuff for the house deed, so we can help you with repairs later. Blake says the laws are changing next year." I had signed because I trusted my daughter. I had signed because I did not want to be a burden who asked too many questions. Now, I looked at the notebook again. Below the acronym were 2 financial terms that made my blood run cold: bridge loan and lien. He was not just trying to embarrass me. He was leveraging my home. He needed my property as collateral for something massive, and he needed a power of attorney to execute it. I flipped forward. The handwriting became more aggressive. The phrase, "the old man," appeared again. But this time, the context was clear. Vernon won't sign transfer. Pressure via scandal. Force family vote. I stared at the name. Vernon. Vernon Holden. Blake's father. The man who owned Holden and Rowe Development. I had always assumed Blake was rich. But now I realized he was just the son of a rich man. The diagram on the page was a map of a coup. Blake needed a scandal, something trashy and chaotic, to prove that the family reputation was at risk. Or perhaps to create a distraction big enough to force a vote of no confidence in his father. I was not just a prop for cruelty. I was a weapon in a corporate takeover. Then I saw the note about my daughter. It was scrawled in the margin, almost as an afterthought. "Dana will freeze. She always does." I traced the words with my thumb. It was so dismissive, so certain. He knew exactly how to break her. He knew that when he screamed at me, she would turn to stone. He had counted on her fear just as much as he had counted on my shame. Suddenly, there was a knock on the main door of the restroom. It opened slowly. "Mom." The voice was small and broken. It was Dana. "Mom, are you in there?" she whispered. "Blake he's really mad. He says you need to leave before security comes." I sat frozen on the toilet lid. My instinct was to answer her, to open the door and comfort her. But then I looked at the line in the notebook, "Dana will freeze." I did not know if she was a victim or an accomplice. I did not know if she knew about the lien on my house. If I opened the door now, she might tell Blake I was looking at something. She might freeze again and let him win. I held my breath. I pressed my hand over my mouth. After a long moment, I heard her sniffle. Then the sound of her heels clicking away on the tile floor. The door hissed shut. I let out a shuddering breath. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my old smartphone. My hands were steady now. The fear had evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard rage. I opened the camera app. Click. I took a photo of the checklist. Click. I took a photo of the power of attorney note. Click. I took a photo of the diagram targeting Vernon. I shoved the notebook deep into the inside pocket of my navy blue coat, buttoning it all the way up to my chin. I looked at myself in the mirror of the stall. The woman staring back at me looked tired. Her dress was cheap. Her shoes were worn. But her eyes were different. For 61 years, I had been the woman who kept the peace, the woman who signed the papers, the woman who sat in the back. Not today. I unlocked the stall door. I was not going to leave. I was going to find out why my son-in-law needed to destroy a 61-year-old widow to steal his father's company. And I was going to stop him. I stared into the mirror above the sink. The fluorescent light hummed, illuminating every line on my face. I was 61 years old. I looked at the woman in the glass and tried to find the girl who had dropped out of high school to care for her sick mother. I tried to find the woman who had spent 40 years breathing in the dust of the Greywick Municipal Archives, eating sandwich crusts and skipping dinners just so Dana could go to a university. I had spent my entire life making myself smaller so my daughter could grow bigger. I had lived on less so she could have more. When my husband died 5 years ago, Dana had held my hand at the funeral. She had cried and promised me that we would be okay. She had said she would take care of me. But then she married Blake. At first, he was charming. He opened doors. He paid for dinners. But slowly, the temperature changed. It started with small comments about my clothes. Then it was restrictions on when I could visit. Then came the criticism of Dana herself. I watched my vibrant, opinionated daughter turn into a shadow who checked her husband's face before she dared to smile. The phrase changed from, "I love you," "Mum," to "Mum. Don't embarrass us." I closed my eyes, and the memory of that afternoon in my kitchen came rushing back. It was 3 months ago. Dana had rushed in, breathless and frantic. She had placed a stack of documents on my table, right next to my coffee cup. "Mom, I need you to sign these," she had said, her voice tight. "It is just a tax adjustment for the house. The city is changing the zoning laws," Blake says. "Blake says we have to do it today or you might get fined. Do I need to read it?" I had asked, reaching for my reading glasses. "No, I mean, there is no time," she had stammered, pushing the pen into my hand. "Please, Mom, just sign it. If you don't, Blake will be so angry with me. He is trying to help you." I had signed. I had signed because I saw the terror in her eyes. I thought I was saving her from an argument. I did not know I was signing away my own life. I opened my eyes. The pain in my chest was not from poverty. I knew how to be poor. I knew how to stretch $1 until it snapped. The pain came from the realization that I was just a stain in their perfect picture. To Blake. And now to Dana. I was not a mother. I was a liability to be managed. I was a vulnerability to be exploited. But then I thought of Willa. My granddaughter was the only one who still called me just to say hello. She sent me pictures of her dress fittings. She told me about her dreams of opening a bakery. She was innocent. She thought this wedding was about love. She did not know she was walking down an aisle paved with fraud and blackmail. If I walked away now, if I let Blake win, I would be leaving Willa in the same cage that held Dana. I looked at my reflection one last time. My hair was grey, pulled back in a severe clip. My skin was wrinkled. But those wrinkles were honest. They were earned through decades of hard work and sacrifice. They were not things to be ashamed of. They were not things to be trampled on by a man in a $3,000 suit who needed a cheat sheet to destroy a widow. I turned on the faucet. The water was freezing. I splashed it onto my face, scrubbing away the heat of the humiliation. I dried my skin with a rough paper towel. I did not fix my makeup. I did not smooth my dress. I stood up straight. I was done begging for permission to exist. I was done apologizing for taking up space. I unlocked the restroom door and stepped out into the corridor. The noise of the reception was a distant rumble, muffled by the heavy walls. I took a deep breath, ready to march back into the lion's den. But I was not alone. Standing near the end of the hallway, leaning against a decorative pillar, was the man with the silver hair. He was the same man I had seen outside the gates. He was not looking at his phone. He was looking directly at me. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, and unblinking. It was as if he had been standing there for 10 minutes, waiting for the exact moment I would wake up. He pushed himself off the pillar and took a step toward me. "Mrs. Klein," he said, his voice low and steady. "I was beginning to worry you had climbed out the window." The man did not smile. He extended a hand, not to shake mine, but to gesture toward a quiet alcove away from the passing waiters. "My name is Silas Crow," he said, his voice a low rumble that barely carried over the music. "I am a retired attorney. For 20 years, I served as the Chief Compliance Officer for Holden and Rowe Development. I studied him. His suit was cut from a decade ago, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the hallway with the practiced paranoia of a man who knew where the bodies were buried. I do not know you, Mr. Crow," I said, keeping my hand over the pocket where the notebook burned against my ribs. "And I am not in the mood for conversation. Mrs. Klein, if you continue to stay silent to keep the peace, they will take more than just your dignity tonight," Silas said, stepping closer so his words hit me like stones. "They will take your home." I froze. The air in the hallway felt suddenly thin. The music from the reception seemed to fade into a dull buzz. "What? What are you talking about?" I whispered, my voice hitching. "How could you possibly know about my house?" "Because I suspect you just found the playbook," he said, nodding discreetly toward my handbag. I clutched the bag tighter, my knuckles turning white. You know about the notebook, I know enough," Silas replied, his tone clinical but urgent. 2 weeks ago, I received an anonymous email, encrypted. It detailed a plan to force Vernon Holden to sign over his voting rights in the company. The subject line was simply, "The Wedding Protocol." It outlined a strategy to manufacture a public scandal involving the groom's mother-in-law to pressure the father into stepping down to save face. My knees felt weak. I leaned against the cold plaster wall for support. The cruelty I had experienced 20 minutes ago was not random. It was an industrial process. Why, I asked, my voice trembling. "Why are you telling me this, if you worked for them?" "I was fired for asking too many questions about offshore accounts," Silas said, his expression hardening. "I want to stop a crime, Mrs. Klein. And despite our history, I owe Vernon a warning. He is a hard man, but he does not deserve to be gutted by his own son." He paused, checking the hallway to ensure we were alone. A waiter passed by with a tray of empty glasses, the clinking sound echoing in the silence. "Here is the reality," Silas continued. "Blake needs Vernon to see you as a liability today. If you explode, if you cry, if you make a scene, Blake wins. Vernon signs the transfer to stop the embarrassment. And once Blake has control, he will execute the lien on your property to cover his gambling debts. That paper you signed? It was likely a deed transfer disguised as a tax document. I felt bile rise in my throat. The image of Donna pleading with me to sign the papers flashed in my mind. She had been so scared. So, what do? I asked. We do not make a scene. Not yet, Silas said. We build a case. We need proof that you signed those papers under duress and deceit, and we need proof that the events of today were staged. He pointed a long finger toward the ceiling corners of the ballroom, visible through the open doors. The Crestmont Conservatory has a high-end security system, internal cameras, audio in the main hall. If we can secure footage proving Blake orchestrated the staff to humiliate you, we can prove a pattern of harassment. That invalidates the legality of any document signed under his pressure. It proves psychological coercion. I looked past him, through the double doors and into the ballroom. Blake was standing near the wedding cake, laughing with a group of men. He looked radiant. He looked like a director watching his masterpiece unfold. Next to him, Dana stood like a statue. Her eyes were empty, fixed on a point in the middle distance. She looked like she had already drowned. And then there was Willa. My sweet granddaughter was in the center of the dance floor, twirling in her white dress, smiling at her friends, completely unaware that her wedding was a crime scene. I looked back at Silas. The fear was gone. Okay, I said. I will do it. Silas nodded, reaching into his pocket for his phone. But I have conditions, I added, my voice sharpening. Name them, Silas said. We do not hurt Willa, I said firmly. We do not ruin her memory of this day more than we have to. And I do not want tricks. I do not want to lie. I want the truth to be the weapon. Can you do that? Silas looked at me with something resembling respect. The truth, he agreed. Nothing else. We moved quickly but quietly toward the administrative office tucked behind the main cloakroom. Silas did not run. He walked with the brisk, terrifying efficiency of a man who had spent decades cleaning up corporate messes. When we reached the office door, he knocked once and entered without waiting for an invitation. The venue manager, a man with a shiny forehead and a nervous smile, looked up from his desk. Excuse me, this is a private. The manager started. Silas placed a card on the desk. It was heavy, cream-coloured stock. It was his old business card from Holden and Rowe, but it still carried the weight of the name. My name is Silas Crowe, he said, his voice dropping to a confidential register. We have a potential liability issue regarding a guest's safety and harassment by your staff. Specifically, an incident at the buffet line 10 minutes ago. I need to know if your security cameras cover that quadrant and if audio is enabled. The manager picked up the card, his eyes widening as he recognized the development firm's name. Yes, we have cameras, but I cannot show you footage without a warrant. We do not need a copy. Silas lied smoothly. We just need to verify the angle so we can assure the family that the incident was captured. It protects you as much as it protects Mrs. Klein. The manager hesitated, then typed a password into his computer. He turned the monitor. There, in high definition, was the buffet area. The angle was perfect. It showed Blake's aggressive posture, his hand slamming the table, and the staff members snickering. Audio, Silas asked. It records ambient sound. The manager admitted. Good, Silas said. Do not delete that. We walked back out into the corridor. My phone buzzed in my hand. I had sent a text to Sarah, a records clerk at the Greywick Municipal Archives, who owed me a favour for covering her shifts last Christmas. I had asked her to check the county database for my address. I looked at the screen. The message was short, but it hit me harder than Blake's insults. Found a notice of default filed 2 months ago. Also a lien. Marge. It was signed by a Dana Holden acting as agent. Call me. I stopped walking. The hallway spun. I leaned against the wall, the breath leaving my lungs. It was Dana, I whispered, showing the screen to Silas. She filed the lien. She signed the papers to put my house in debt. My own daughter. Silas caught my arm before I could slide to the floor. His grip was firm. Stop, he ordered, his voice sharp. Look at the date. 2 months ago. That is exactly when she brought you those tax papers. Correct? I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. I reached into my bag and pulled out the crumpled envelope I had carried with me, intending to ask Blake about the tax status during a quiet moment. I pulled out the document I had signed without reading. It was not a tax form. It was a durable power of attorney, granting Dana full control over my assets. She did not know, Silas said, tapping the paper, or she was forced. Blake needed a signature to secure the loan. He used her to get to you. Do not blame the weapon. Mrs. Klein, blame the hand that wields it. He was right. I wiped my face. Blaming Dana was what Blake wanted. It would isolate me further. We need him to say it, Silas said, checking the battery on his phone. This state has a one-party consent law for recording conversations. As long as one person in the conversation agrees to be recorded, that is you. It is legal, admissible evidence. What do? I asked. Go to him? Be the victim he wants you to be. Be weak. Be scared. Ask him if signing more papers will make it stop. His ego is his blind spot. He will not be able to resist bragging. I took a deep breath. I smoothed my cheap blue dress. I let my shoulders slump. I practiced the look of a defeated old woman, the look I had worn for too many years. I walked back into the reception hall. The music was loud. Blake was standing near the bar, holding court with 3 other men. He looked powerful, invincible. I approached him slowly. When he saw me, his lip curled. I thought I told you to leave, Blake said, loud enough for his friends to hear. Blake, please, I said, my voice trembling just enough to sound pathetic. I need 1 minute. Just 1 minute to apologize. Please. The men around him laughed. Blake puffed out his chest. He enjoyed this. He enjoyed seeing me beg. Fine, he said, waving his hand dismissively at his friends. 1 minute? Make it fast. He stepped away from the group, moving toward the edge of the room where it was slightly quieter. He did not notice Silas standing 10 feet away, back turned to us, phone held casually at his side, the microphone pointed directly at our voices. I looked up at my son-in-law, and for the first time, I saw him not as a monster, but as a fool. I am listening. Marge. He sneered. Beg. I stood before him, hunching my shoulders to make myself look smaller. I clasped my hands together in a plea that I knew would feed his ego. Blake swirled the amber liquid in his glass, looking at me with a mixture of boredom and disdain. He checked his watch, as if destroying my life was taking up too much of his valuable schedule. Blake, I know you and Dana are under a lot of pressure, I said, forcing my voice to shake. I know you need money. If I sign something else, will the humiliation stop? Can I just sit down and watch my granddaughter get married? The bait was simple, but Blake was too arrogant to see the hook. He took a sip of his drink and smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "It is very simple. Marge," he said, stepping closer, invading my personal space. "You sign the full transfer for asset management. You give us control. You do that. And you can sit in the corner and eat your cake. You don't do it. And security throws you out." I looked at him with feigned confusion. "But what assets? I have nothing. Just the house." Blake laughed, a short, sharp bark of amusement. "Don't play dumb. I saw the records, the life insurance payout from your husband, the $50,000 you put into that low-yield pension account. You are sitting on cash while we have bills to pay." A chill went down my spine. He had not just looked at public records. He had accessed private financial data. He had been stalking my bank accounts for months, counting every penny my husband had left me to survive on. You looked at my accounts," I asked, letting the horror seep into my voice. "I did what was necessary," Blake replied, shrugging. "You think tonight is an accident? You think the moocher comment at the buffet was just me losing my temper? Marge, please." It was a script. Act 1 of the evening. He was smiling like he was telling a funny story at a cocktail party. He was proud of it. "A script," I repeated, making sure my voice was loud enough for Silas's phone to catch, but quiet enough not to alert the guests nearby. "The old man needs a push," Blake whispered, his eyes darting toward the VIP table where Vernon Holden sat. "Vernon won't sign the voting rights transfer. He holds on to the company like a dog with a bone. But he hates scandal. He hates embarrassment more than he hates me." The puzzle pieces snapped together with a violent click. This was not about my small house in Lakeshore Falls. This was a corporate coup. I was just the prop. Blake was manufacturing a trashy family drama right in the middle of the wedding of the year to force his father to hand over the company to avoid further public shame. "So I am just a tool to make Vernon quit?" I asked. "You are the leverage," Blake corrected, finishing his drink. "Vernon sees his in-laws acting like trash. He realizes the legacy is tainted. He signs the company over to me to clean up the mess. It is efficient." I felt a presence at the end of the hallway. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a flash of white silk. It was Dana. She was standing in the shadows, her hand covering her mouth. Her face was the color of ash. She was listening. I looked back at Blake. I needed one last thing. "And if I don't sign?" I asked, straightening my back just a fraction. "If I walk out right now," Blake leaned in, his breath smelling of expensive scotch and rot. "Then you lose the house," he said, his voice flat and deadly. "The lien is already active. I call the loan tomorrow. You will be on the street in 30 days. And Dana, well, Dana will lose everything. Her car, her status, her friends. I will make sure she blames you for every cent she loses." It was a threat that required no physical violence. It was total destruction. From the shadows. A sob broke the silence. Blake spun around. Dana stepped into the light, her eyes wide with horror. She looked from her husband to me, her body trembling. "Blake," Dana whispered, her voice barely audible. You said it was just a temporary loan. You said Mom agreed." Blake's face twisted in annoyance. "Dana, go back to the party." "No," she said, her voice shaking violently. You said we were saving the family. You didn't say you were stealing Mom's house." "I am doing what needs to be done," Blake snapped. Dana looked at me. For the first time in years, the fog in her eyes cleared. She was not the villain. She was just another victim he had bludgeoned into submission. "Mum," she choked out, tears streaming down her face. "Mum, I am so sorry. I didn't know. I swear. I didn't know it was like this." Silas moved instantly. He stepped out from the shadows, placing his body between Blake and my daughter like a physical shield. He did not look at Blake. He looked at Dana, his voice commanding and low. "Mrs. Holden, you need to come with us. Now." Blake opened his mouth to shout, but Silas cast a glance at the recording device still visible in his hand. Blake hesitated, his eyes darting around the hallway. In that split second of indecision, I grabbed Dana's cold hand and pulled her toward the service door. We hurried down a narrow corridor and ducked into a small staff changing room filled with spare uniforms and cleaning supplies. The moment the door clicked shut, Dana collapsed onto a metal folding chair. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. He told me it was just temporary." Dana sobbed, her hands clutching her silk dress. "He said he made bad investments. He owes people, dangerous people. He told me if I didn't get you to sign the house over, they would come for us. They would come for Willa." I knelt in front of her. My anger toward her evaporated, replaced by a deep, aching pity. She was not a conspirator. She was a hostage. "Dana, look at me," I said, forcing her to meet my eyes. "There are no dangerous investors. There is only Blake and his gambling debts. He terrified you so you would rob your own mother. I just wanted to keep the peace," she whispered. "I didn't want to lose everything." I held her face in my hands. "Are you afraid of losing the image, or are you afraid of losing yourself?" Dana gasped. Her breath hitched in her throat. She looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in years. The mask of the perfect wife crumbled. I am lost. Mom, I am so lost." Silas was already typing on his phone in the corner of the room. He looked up, his face grim. "We do not have much time. Blake will regroup. I just sent a message to Vernon Holden's private number. I told him the scandal being engineered tonight is targeting him. Not Mrs. Klein? Will he come?" I asked. "He is a paranoid man," Silas replied. "He will come." 2 minutes later. There was a heavy knock on the service door. Silas opened it. Vernon Holden stood there. He looked older than I remembered. His tuxedo was impeccable, but his face was grey and lined with exhaustion. He looked from Silas to me, and then to his weeping daughter-in-law. "This better be good." "Crow," Vernon growled. "Blake is telling people my mother-in-law is having a mental breakdown in the hallway. Why are you hiding in a closet?" "We are not hiding," I said, standing up. "We are gathering evidence." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the leather notebook. I opened it to the page with the jagged tear. I handed it to the man who owned half the city. "Read the last line," I said. Vernon squinted at the page. I saw his eyes widen as he recognized the handwriting. "Today is the day. The old man won't." Vernon read aloud. He flipped back a few pages, scanning the diagrams, the checklist for the scandal, the notes about forcing a family vote. His hands began to shake. He wrote this," Vernon whispered. "My son wrote this. He plans to humiliate me tonight to prove you have lost control of your family." I explained. "He wants to force you to step down so he can take the company." Vernon closed the book. He closed his eyes. He did not look surprised. He looked defeated. I knew he wanted the chair, Vernon said, his voice sounding like gravel. But I didn't know he would burn down his own wedding to get it. He has been pressuring me for months. He claims to have evidence of a regulatory oversight I made 20 years ago. Blackmail. His own father. The room went silent. It was a circle of betrayal. Blake had weaponized everyone. Then we stop him, Silas said, stepping forward. We do not let him control the narrative. We go back out there. We use the diary. We use the recording of him threatening Mrs. Klein. And we use Dana. I looked at Dana. She was wiping her eyes, her jaw set in a new, fragile determination. I will say it, Dana said, her voice trembling but clear. I will tell them about the papers. I hesitated. I thought of Willa, dancing in the ballroom, oblivious to the war in the back room. Vernon? I said softly. It is Willa's wedding. If we do this, if we expose him now, it destroys her day. Maybe we should wait until tomorrow. Vernon looked at me. The hardness returned to his eyes, but this time it was directed at the door, at his son. Marge, he said, if we do not stop this today, right now, he will use that girl just like he used Dana. He will drain her accounts. He will leverage her future. If we don't stop it, tomorrow it stains her whole life. He was right. A ruined wedding was better than a ruined life. I nodded. I smoothed down the front of my dress. I felt the weight of the notebook in my pocket, but it no longer felt like a burden. It felt like ammunition. Okay, I said. Let's go back to the party. I walked toward the DJ booth with a calmness that frightened me. My heart was not racing anymore. It was beating with a slow, heavy rhythm, like a war drum. Blake was standing near the edge of the dance floor, watching me approach. He saw my slumped shoulders and my lowered head, and he mistook my resolve for defeat. He thought I was coming to surrender. I signaled to the DJ that I wanted to speak. The young man looked at Blake for permission. Blake smirked, swirling his drink, and gave a magnanimous nod. He wanted this. He wanted the final act of my humiliation to be public. He wanted me to apologize for existing. The music faded. I took the microphone. My hand was steady. I looked out at the sea of faces, at the 200 guests who had laughed at me only an hour ago. Then I looked at Willa. She was sitting at the head table, looking confused. Willa, I said, my voice projecting clear and warm through the speakers. When you were born, I held you for 3 hours straight because I was afraid to put you down, watching you tonight. You look like a dream. You deserve a life built on love. You deserve a life built on truth. The room softened. A few guests smiled. Blake looked bored, checking his watch. Then I shifted my stance. I looked directly at my son-in-law. But there are some things tonight that need to be called by their right names, I said, my tone dropping to a steel register. Silence is not peace, and theft is not family business. Blake's smile vanished. He took a step forward. That is enough. Marge, he barked, his voice cutting through the air. Give me the microphone. You are drunk. He moved to intercept me, but suddenly, a chair scraped loudly against the floor. It was Vernon Holden. The old man stood up slowly at the VIP table. He did not shout. He simply raised one hand toward the DJ booth and made a cutting motion across his throat. Turn it off, Vernon ordered. The ambient music cut instantly. The silence in the ballroom was sudden and violent. Blake froze, looking at his father in shock. "Dad, what are you doing?" "She is embarrassing us," Blake said, pointing a finger at me. Then came the movement that changed the room. Dana, who had been standing in the shadows near the cake table, walked forward. Her face was pale, and her hands were trembling violently, but she did not stop until she was standing right next to me. She took my free hand and squeezed it. Dana Blake hissed, his eyes widening. "Get down here. Now." "No," Dana said. It was a whisper, but in the dead silence, it sounded like a scream. Silas stepped out from behind the decorative pillars. He did not look like a guest. He looked like a prosecutor. "Ladies and gentlemen," Silas said, his voice projecting without a microphone. "We are not here to ruin a celebration. We are here to clarify a legal matter regarding a durable power of attorney signed under duress and a fraudulent lien placed on the property of Mrs. Klein 2 months ago." A ripple of whispers went through the crowd. The words lien and fraud hung in the air like smoke. Blake laughed. It was a loud, forced sound. "This is ridiculous. Look at her. She is senile. She is just an old woman who is jealous of our success. She wants money." "I do not want your money, Blake," I said into the microphone. "I have evidence. I do not have a grudge." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the black leather notebook. I held it up so the light caught the gold initials B.H. on the cover. Blake's face drained of colour. "I found this under your seat," I said. I opened it to the marked page. "You wrote this. Seat placement, food incident, recording. Get Marge to sign under stress." I looked at the guests. The incident at the buffet. The missing name card. It was not an accident. It was a script. It is all written down right here. The whispers turned into audible gasps. People turned to look at Blake. The look of disgust on their faces was real this time. "Give me that," Blake shouted, lunging toward the stage. "That is my private property." She stole it. He was stopped, not by security, but by the venue manager. The man I had spoken to earlier stepped into the light, holding a tablet. "Mr. Halden," the manager said, his voice shaking but firm. "I cannot let you disrupt this. We have reviewed the security logs as requested by Mr. Crow. The cameras confirm that at 6 o'clock, you instructed the catering staff to bypass table 29. We also have audio of you telling the head waiter to make sure the old woman feels unwelcome." Blake looked around wildly. The walls were closing in. He looked at Dana, but she refused to look at him. He looked at his father, but Vernon was staring at him with a look of icy detachment. This is a set-up," Blake screamed, his composure shattering. "You are all listening to a crazy woman and a fired lawyer." He was cornered. But I knew the game was not over. He was still fighting. He thought it was just his word against a notebook and a video. He did not know about the recording on the phone in Silas's pocket. He did not know about the missing page. I lowered the microphone slightly. I looked him in the eye. I was not done. The trap was set, and he was standing right in the center of it. The room was quiet, but it was not empty of sound. It was filled with the heavy, suffocating pressure of truth. Silas connected his phone to the audio cable the DJ had vacated. He pressed a single button. Blake's voice, clear and undeniably arrogant, boomed through the speakers. "If you don't sign, you will lose the house. The lien is already active. And Dana? Well, Dana will lose everything." The recording cut off. The silence that followed was absolute. 200 guests stared at the groom. The mask of the successful businessman had not just slipped, it had been incinerated. Blake stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. Vernon Holden walked slowly toward his son. He reached into his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. "You thought you were the only one writing scripts?" "Son," Vernon said, his voice devoid of warmth. "I have been suspicious of the accounts for 6 months. I recorded our meeting yesterday, the one where you suggested that a little public drama would force me to retire. I wanted to believe I was wrong. I wanted to believe my son was not a thief." Vernon threw the envelope onto the table. It slid across the surface and stopped right in front of Blake. Dana stepped forward. She wiped her face, ruining her makeup, but looking stronger than she had in years. She faced the crowd, her voice trembling but audible. "I signed the papers," Dana said. "But I signed them because I was told there was no other choice. I was told my mother would be homeless. I was told my daughter would suffer. It wasn't physical. He never hit me, but he made sure I couldn't breathe unless he allowed it." Silas stepped up next to me. He held up the small, torn piece of paper I had found tucked into the back pocket of the diary. He held it next to the jagged edge of the final page. It was a perfect match. "The entry is complete now," Silas announced. "It reads, 'Today is the day. The old man won't sign unless we break them.' Break them, not physically, but spiritually. He wanted to break his wife and his mother-in-law to break his father." I turned to Willa. My granddaughter was standing by the head table, tears streaming down her face. She looked at Blake with horror, then at me with confusion. "Willa," I said softly into the microphone, "I am so sorry to bring this storm to your day, but I chose to speak the truth because I could not let you start your marriage inside a lie. I could not let you live in a family built on quicksand." Willa did not scream. She did not run. She simply took off her veil, folded it, and placed it on the table. She walked past Blake without looking at him and came to stand beside me. Vernon nodded to a man sitting at table 4, the partner I had seen earlier. The man stood up and pulled a badge from his jacket. "Investigator Miller, County Financial Crimes Division," the man said. "Mr. Holden, we have enough here to open the docket. The coercion invalidates the contracts, and the attempted fraud regarding the company transfer is a felony." Blake's face crumpled. The arrogance evaporated, leaving behind a terrified child. He looked at the security guards moving toward him. He looked at his father, who turned away. Then he looked at me. "Marge!" "Please," Blake stammered, his eyes wide. "We are family. You can't let them take me. I can fix it. Please. Forgive me." I looked at him. I remembered the way he had looked at me at the buffet. I remembered the way he had laughed when he threatened to take my home. Forgiveness is for the heart. "Blake," I said, my voice steady and cold. "But consequences are for the law." I turned to the notary public, who had been hired for the wedding license but was now serving a different purpose. Silas placed a document on the table, a formal revocation of power of attorney. I signed it with a steady hand. "The lien is frozen," Silas declared, "and the house is safe." Security escorted Blake out the side door. He did not fight. He slumped, defeated by the very tools he had tried to use against us: paper, ink, and the truth. The room exhaled. The tension broke. I looked at Dana. She was crying, But it was a different kind of cry. It was the cry of someone who had just walked out of a prison. "You can start over now," I told her, pulling her into a hug. "You can start over without having to make someone else silent just to survive." Willa took my hand. We stood there. 3 generations of women, battered but standing. The wedding was over. But for the first time in a long time, our lives were actually beginning. Thanks so much for listening to this story. If you enjoyed this tale of justice and family secrets, please drop a comment down below. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from and what you would have done if you were in Marge's shoes. Don't forget to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, like this video, and hit that hype button to help these stories reach even more people. See you in the next one.